Get her out of here. She doesn't belong in first class. The words sliced through the air like a whip, freezing every conversation in the Skyhaven International Airport lounge. Heads turned, champagne glasses stopped mid-air. Laughter died in throats as silence wrapped the marble room in a suffocating grip. A black woman in a navy blazer and scuffed loafers stood motionless by the reception counter, clutching a worn leather briefcase. Her name was Dr. Lena Washington, but no one here seemed to care who she was. To them, she didn't look the part, and that was enough. Before we dive deeper, let me ask you this. Where are you watching from? Comment your city below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit like if you believe no one should ever be judged by the color of their skin or the clothes they wear. Now, back to the story. Lena had walked into the exclusive first-class lounge with quiet confidence. Her e-ticket scanned without issue. Yet from the moment she stepped inside, she felt every pair of eyes on her, around her. Passengers in tailored suits and shimmering dresses sipped vintage champagne beneath crystal chandeliers, their designer luggage perfectly aligned beside polished leather seats. Everything here screamed wealth, privilege, belonging, and for reasons unspoken but undeniable. Many believed she had none of it. What they didn't know was that Lena wasn't just another traveler. She was the CEO of Pinnacle Ventures, one of the largest private equity firms in the world, controlling billions in assets and holding the power to make or break corporations overnight. Today, she was on a covert mission, conducting a Level 5 ethics audit on Horizon Airways, the struggling airline whose survival depended entirely on Pinnacle's $5.5 billion investment. Her modest outfit wasn't an accident, it was intentional, a silent test of Horizon's culture and its people. But it didn't take long for that test to turn into a confrontation. Victoria Reed, the airport's formidable security director, sat in her surveillance office, watching Lena through a wall of high-definition monitors. At 52, Victoria had ruled Skyhaven for over 2 decades, her reputation built on control and authority, but also, quietly, on biases she'd never had to confront. When Lena appeared on the screen, alone, understated, and out of place among dripping diamonds and polished Rolexes, Victoria didn't hesitate. She pressed her radio, her voice sharp and cold. Priority lounge, suspicious female, mid-40s, navy blazer, initiate inspection. 2 security officers appeared within seconds, tall and imposing in their dark uniforms, moving with the kind of authority that dared anyone to question them. The entire lounge turned into a theater, and Lena was the unwilling star. One officer blocked her path. The other held out a hand. "Ticket and ID," he demanded flatly, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Without hesitation, Lena unlocked her phone and handed it over. Her voice was calm, even steady. First-class boarding pass. New York. The younger officer glanced at the screen, confirming her seat. 2A. But something in his posture shifted, a silent hesitation betraying the truth. There was no problem here. Yet he didn't step aside. Victoria's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Ask her purpose." He swallowed, repeating the instruction like a script. "Ma'am, what's your reason for being here?" Lena tilted her head slightly, her expression serene but firm. "Business," she replied, her voice measured, almost deliberate. That single word hung in the air like a challenge. To Victoria, however, it sounded like defiance. Moments later, heels clicked against marble as Victoria herself emerged from behind the security desk, her tailored black suit immaculate, her expression sharp enough to cut glass. She stopped just inches from Lena, her voice low but laced with venom. "You're in the wrong lounge," she said, each syllable deliberate. "Economy is that way." A murmur rippled through the crowd, gasps hidden behind manicured hands, whispers darting between champagne glasses. Someone chuckled softly. Another pulled out their phone, sensing a viral moment unfolding. Lena's jaw tightened, but her gaze never wavered. "I belong here," she said simply. Her voice wasn't raised, Yet somehow it carried, slicing through the murmurs and silencing the whispers. Victoria's composure faltered for a fraction of a second before she masked it with authority. "Escort her to security," she ordered, stepping aside without another glance. The officers flanked Lena, their boots tapping against the polished marble as they led her out of the lounge. Cameras followed. Passengers craned their necks. Some recorded quietly, while others muttered judgments under their breath about her clothes, her briefcase, her skin, anything but the possibility that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Lena walked steadily, her grip tightening around her briefcase handle, her breath even, her pace unbroken. Inside, though, she knew exactly what was happening, and she was ready. Every step, every word, every glance was being recorded by a tiny lapel camera hidden beneath her blazer. What Victoria didn't know, what no one here knew, was that Lena had expected this. Horizon Airways culture had been whispered about for months, an undercurrent of discrimination, favoritism, and silent bias running through its ranks like a hidden fault line. Today was about more than Lena's dignity. It was about exposing the truth. The security office was stark, cold, and intentionally intimidating, a place designed to make people falter, a metal table, harsh fluorescent lights, walls painted an unforgiving gray. But Lena didn't falter. She sat calmly, back straight, hands folded lightly on her briefcase as Officer Marcus Kane, a grizzled veteran with 3 decades of service, leaned forward across the table. Full name. He demanded, "Dr. Lena Washington," she replied evenly, her tone unshaken. His eyebrow arched slightly at the title, but he didn't comment. "Purpose of your trip?" "Business," she said again, deliberate as before. Kane's eyes shifted toward the briefcase. "What's inside?" Lena met his gaze without flinching. "Confidential documents." A younger female officer stepped forward, hand reaching for the latch, but Lena's voice cut through like steel. "You need a court order to open that." The officer froze mid-motion, her hand retreating. Kane glanced at his partner, irritation flashing across his face, but he said nothing. Behind the one-way glass, Victoria watched, arms crossed, her certainty beginning to crack. Lena's calm was more than composure. It was strategy. She was controlling the room without raising her voice, turning their interrogation into her stage. And yet, outside these walls, whispers had already begun spreading across the lounge. "Who is she?" someone asked. "Why didn't they just check her ticket?" another murmured. By the time Lena would step out of this room, she knew the entire airport would be watching. But for Lena Washington, this wasn't humiliation. It was documentation, evidence, leverage. She wasn't here just to board a plane. She was here to reveal a culture built on quiet prejudice, and the people around her had just handed her everything she needed. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly above Lena's head as Officer Marcus Kane studied her like she was an unsolved riddle, flipping her boarding pass between his fingers as though waiting for it to confess something it didn't hold. Outside the glass door, people still whispered, their silhouettes faint against the blurred hallway, hungry for answers about why this quiet black woman had become the center of so much unwanted attention. Lena sat perfectly still, her navy blazer smooth across her shoulders, her hands folded lightly on the table as if she had all the time in the world. She knew the power of silence, the weight it carried when used with intent. But Victoria Reed misread that silence as submission. Behind the glass, Victoria's jaw tightened, her arms folded across her chest like a shield of authority she wasn't prepared to lower. Her voice came through the intercom, cold and sharp, demanding control. Ask her purpose again. Kane looked uncomfortable but obeyed. "Dr. Washington," he said, trying to soften his tone. "Why are you traveling to New York today?" Lena met his gaze directly, her voice calm but unyielding. "Business." One word. No explanations. Victoria's sigh hissed through the speaker, irritated by Lena's brevity. She grabbed the intercom herself this time, her voice slicing through the quiet room. Business doing what? Because people don't carry worn briefcases into a first-class lounge unless they're trying to pass for something they're not. The insult wasn't subtle. Lena's expression didn't change, but a slight narrowing of her eyes made Kane hesitate before continuing. He cleared his throat. Look, ma'am, this could be a lot easier if you'd just answer. I've answered you, Lena interrupted softly. Her words smooth as polished glass, the quiet authority in her tone shifting the power dynamic without effort. I'm traveling to New York for business. That is the extent of what I'm obligated to disclose. The younger female officer shifted uncomfortably, her gaze darting between Lena and Kane, sensing that the woman in front of them wasn't afraid, wasn't flustered, wasn't like the others they'd seen fold beneath intimidation. Victoria stormed into the room moments later, heels striking the tile like a drumbeat, each click louder than the last. Her dark suit was immaculate, her posture stiff with superiority, her voice controlled but lined with venom. Let's not waste time, she said, planting both palms flat on the table. You're in a secured area. This lounge is reserved for elite travelers, and we've had reports of irregularities. Lena tilted her head slightly, her voice steady and measured. Irregularities. Meaning me? Victoria leaned in, her shadow falling across Lena's face, testing boundaries, meaning passengers whose credentials don't match the company they keep. Her words carried the weight of accusation cloaked in protocol, but Lena didn't flinch. My credentials match exactly, she said softly, but her calm cut deeper than raised voices ever could, behind Victoria. Kane shifted awkwardly, glancing at the boarding pass still in his hand. Seat 2A, first class, verified. Yet Victoria pushed forward, unwilling to yield authority. Then tell me, she said, folding her arms. What business are you conducting that requires first-class accommodations? Lena straightened her back, her voice controlled and deliberate. Every syllable chosen like chess moves, confidential business. Her tone didn't waver, her expression unchanging, and that composure lit a quiet fire of frustration in Victoria's chest. Around them. The air thickened with tension as the unspoken truths hung between them. Truths neither would name out loud. The officers in the room didn't need to hear the words to know what was happening. They saw it in the subtle glance at Lena's clothes, the judgment in the pause before every question, the lingering assumption that a black woman with a modest appearance didn't belong where wealth was assumed and privilege went unquestioned. It wasn't about security. It never was. And Lena knew it. But she didn't argue. Not yet. Instead, she sat in stillness, her measured breathing, her steady gaze, all of it a quiet strategy. Every second she allowed Victoria to speak dug the hole deeper. Every recorded word from Lena's hidden lapel camera adding weight to the evidence she was gathering. Outside the office, word of the confrontation had already spread through the lounge like wildfire. Passengers whispered, some feigning outrage while others smirked knowingly, convinced they were watching a woman caught in a lie. One man in a gray Armani suit muttered loudly to his companion, probably trying to sneak in where she doesn't belong, his voice just loud enough for others to hear. A group of younger travelers pulled out their phones, angling cameras toward the door, waiting for a moment of drama to post online. Each second that passed wasn't just a test of Lena's patience. It was a slow, deliberate humiliation staged beneath polished marble and crystal chandeliers. Victoria thought she had control, but what she didn't realize was that Lena wasn't trying to fight her authority, she was documenting it. Her lapel camera blinked faintly beneath her blazer, recording everything, the tone, the words, the biases barely hidden behind polite procedure. And Lena knew she wasn't just collecting evidence for herself. She was building a case, one that could decide the future of Horizon Airways itself. The airline's culture had been whispered about for months, accusations of subtle discrimination brushed aside by executives who thought silence meant survival. But Lena wasn't here to survive. She was here to expose. Victoria leaned back in her chair, mistaking Lena's silence for weakness, her lips curling in a small, satisfied smirk. "I'll make this simple," she said, folding her hands atop the table. "Without a clear explanation for your presence, I can and will have you removed from this lounge and possibly detained for further questioning." Kane hesitated, his discomfort growing, but Victoria ignored him, staring at Lena as though daring her to react. Lena finally leaned forward, her voice quiet but commanding, cutting through the tension like steel through silk. "Remove me," she said, "and I promise you this won't end here." The officers glanced at one another, sensing the shift in energy, the quiet warning beneath her words. But Victoria dismissed it with a wave of her hand. "Escort her out," she ordered flatly. As Lena stood, she adjusted her blazer, collected her briefcase, and looked Victoria directly in the eye, her calm returning like the steady tide. "You're right about one thing," she said softly, almost gently. "This won't end here." With that, Lena walked past the officers, her steps measured and unhurried, as though every movement was intentional. Outside, the lounge was silent, the passengers' stares following her like shadows, their whispers trailing behind her like smoke. Some pitied her, others judged her, but no one knew the truth. Not yet. As she walked toward the private boarding gates, her phone buzzed softly in her pocket, a secure notification flashing on the screen. Audit status, evidence recorded, stage 1 complete. Lena didn't smile, but there was resolve in her eyes now, a quiet promise shaping itself into purpose. Victoria Reed thought she had won. She didn't know she'd just set off a chain reaction that would threaten to bring Horizon Airways to its knees. The security room felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in. Not because of the space itself, but because of the pressure hanging in the air, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the steady drip of tension, the subtle shuffle of restless officers. Everything built into a quiet storm centered on Dr. Lena Washington. She sat perfectly composed at the cold metal table, her leather briefcase resting just inches from her fingertips, the Pinnacle Ventures crest embossed faintly into its worn surface. She wasn't hiding her nerves. She simply didn't have any. Every second, every breath, every blink of her lapel camera was part of a strategy unfolding exactly as she had anticipated. Across from her, Officer Marcus Kane's patience was wearing thin, his brow creased deeper than before. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady but strained. "Help us understand. You claim you're here for business, yet you won't specify what that is. You refuse to let us check your documents. And now we've got passengers calling in reports." He stopped himself, glancing briefly toward the observation window where Victoria Reed stood like a silent predator, her arms crossed tightly, her expression carved from stone. Victoria pressed the intercom, her voice cutting into the room like a blade. "You're not cooperating. Dr. Washington," she said, emphasizing the title with deliberate skepticism. "First-class travelers provide information when requested. People who belong here have nothing to hide." The jab was subtle, but the implication burned. Lena turned slowly toward the intercom speaker, her tone measured and precise. "People who belong here," she repeated softly, her voice steady as the still surface of a lake, "aren't usually interrogated for proving it." That single line shifted the weight in the room. Kane hesitated, his pen freezing mid-note. And even the younger female officer behind him looked up from her terminal, her lips parting slightly as if she'd heard something dangerous. Lena leaned back slightly, her calm composure making the silence heavier, more suffocating. She knew exactly how to control this moment, not through force, but through patience. Outside the security office, chaos had begun to brew. The passengers in the first-class lounge weren't just whispering anymore, they were filming. Dozens of phones were up, tilted toward the frosted glass windows, catching every blurred shadow that moved behind them. Some had already posted short clips online with captions like, "Black woman stopped at first-class lounge and airport security drama unfolding at Skyhaven. Views climbed by the minute. Inside." Lena remained unmoved, but her phone vibrated softly in her blazer pocket. A secure notification from Pinnacle's internal system, without drawing attention. She slid her thumb across the concealed screen, reading the message as if nothing was happening. Stage 2 initiated, FAA liaison monitoring live. She exhaled slowly through her nose, steady and subtle, her mind already 3 steps ahead. Victoria, oblivious to what had just triggered behind the scenes, leaned against the glass, tightening her grip on control. Her voice came again, sharper this time. "I'll make this simple," she said. "You have 2 options. You can voluntarily comply with additional screening, or I will escalate this to TSA detention. That would involve a formal report, possible delays, and if necessary, law enforcement intervention." Kane shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Even he knew this was overreach. Lena finally turned her attention back to him, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "And on what grounds?" she asked quietly. "Would you justify detaining a first-class passenger with a verified ticket, cleared ID, and no violation of policy?" Kane swallowed hard, his silence answering the question before Victoria could, but Victoria refused to yield, storming into the room, her presence dominating the tight space. She placed her palms flat on the table, leaning forward until her perfectly applied makeup caught the light. "Listen to me carefully," she said in a low, deliberate voice. "You are not in control here." Lena's gaze didn't move, her tone as even as before, but her words cut through Victoria's composure like ice through glass. Not yet. A pause hung heavy between them, a quiet warning unspoken yet unmistakable, before Victoria could respond. The door opened, and Megan Reed entered, her polished Navy Horizon Airways uniform perfectly pressed, her gold nameplate gleaming beneath the fluorescent light. Megan, the lead flight attendant on Lena's upcoming flight, and Victoria's younger sister, had arrived to make her role in this humiliation painfully clear. "This is her?" Megan asked, her voice clipped and skeptical, scanning Lena up and down before shaking her head slightly. Figures. Lena didn't acknowledge her, not yet, letting Megan's words dangle in the tense silence. Megan leaned casually against the doorframe, her arms crossed, her tone dripping with mockery. "Passengers like you," she said quietly enough for only the officers to hear, "always think you can game the system. Fake status, borrowed upgrades, but we know better." Kane's jaw tightened, his discomfort growing by the second. But Victoria's approving glance kept him silent. Lena finally turned toward Megan, her voice soft yet resonant, every syllable deliberate. "Passengers like me," she repeated calmly, "are the reason your airline still exists." Megan blinked, confusion flickering across her features before annoyance quickly replaced it. She didn't understand the meaning, not yet, but those words would haunt her soon enough. Meanwhile, outside the lounge, the crowd had grown restless. Travelers whispered in corners, influencers live-streamed commentary, and Horizon Airways executives at corporate headquarters had begun receiving frantic calls from airport staff. Someone had leaked the story internally, and fragments of video were already spreading on social media. The tension was no longer confined to this room. It was growing, stretching outward like cracks in glass. Lena knew the tipping point was near, but she kept her composure, letting every second build pressure. She was documenting more than harassment. She was collecting undeniable evidence of a systemic problem Horizon Airways could no longer hide. Megan, oblivious to the storm already gathering online, leaned closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "You know what's funny?" she whispered, her smirk widening. "Even if you get through this, passengers like the one in 2A rarely make it comfortable up there. You'll feel every cold glance, every little reminder that you don't belong." Lena's lips curved slightly, not into a smile but something subtler, a quiet acknowledgement that Megan had just given her exactly what she needed. Another confirmation, another recorded moment, another nail in Horizon's coffin. At that moment, Lena placed her fingertips lightly on the table, leaning forward just enough to meet Megan's eyes directly. Her voice was steady, her words unshaken, but there was an undertone of authority no one could mistake. "I belong," she said softly, "wherever I choose to be." The younger officer by the wall straightened unconsciously, almost as if the power in the room had shifted without warning. And it had. Megan stepped back instinctively, hiding it with a scoff, while Victoria clenched her jaw, her facade cracking slightly for the first time, but before anyone could respond. Lena's phone buzzed again, another secure notification sliding silently across her screen. Stage 3, FAA review protocol triggered, CEO authority authorization pending. No one in the room knew it yet, but the ground beneath Horizon Airways had just begun to shake. Lena calmly stood, collecting her briefcase, smoothing the edge of her blazer. "Unless you intend to arrest me," she said softly, turning toward Kane. "I'll be boarding my flight now." Kane hesitated, looking to Victoria, but she didn't answer immediately. Her silence spoke volumes. Outside. Passengers angled their phones as the door opened, and Lena stepped back into the lounge, her head held high, her composure untouched, her calm radiating through the murmuring crowd. They didn't know her name yet. They didn't know her power. But they would. Very soon. The walk down the jet bridge felt longer than it should have. Not because Lena hesitated, but because every step was deliberate, measured, calculated. Her boarding pass glowed faintly on her phone screen as she approached the sleek Horizon Airways Boeing 787, where the luxury of first class awaited those who were considered belonging. But for Lena Washington, belonging had never been granted. She had learned long ago to take it, inside the cabin. Soft amber lights illuminated polished walnut panels, leather seats, and champagne trays balanced delicately on silver stands. Passengers were already settled into wide recliners, scrolling through tablets and sipping vintage rosé, their quiet conversations rising and falling like the low hum of distant static. Lena walked down the aisle toward seat 2A, her briefcase in hand, her composure unbroken despite the sea of eyes following her every movement. Megan Reed stood near the entrance, her Navy Horizon Airways uniform flawless, her gold nameplate perfectly polished. Her professional smile was sharp, but the coldness in her eyes betrayed her real intent. She stepped forward as Lena approached, her voice pitched just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Miss Washington," she said sweetly, "before you get comfortable, I need to verify your boarding status one more time." Lena stopped, turning slightly to meet Megan's gaze, her tone even. "My ticket was verified at the gate." Megan smiled tightly. "Yes, but we've had irregularities today, for safety purposes." Her words, innocuous on the surface, carried a weight passengers understood instantly. This wasn't about safety. This was about belonging. Phones came up almost immediately, subtle at first, then more openly. Passengers tilted their cameras under the guise of texting, capturing the quiet confrontation playing out inches from seat 2A. Lena handed over her phone without hesitation. Her secure e-ticket displayed clearly. Megan glanced at it, scanning the details she already knew were correct, then returned the device with a faint sigh she didn't bother hiding. "Thank you," she said curtly, moving on without an apology. Lena placed her briefcase carefully beneath her seat, settling in with the kind of calmness that unsettles people who expect fear. But Megan wasn't finished. 10 minutes later, as other passengers stowed their bags and adjusted champagne flutes, Megan returned, her steps purposeful, her smile sharpened into something practiced and artificial. "Miss Washington," she said louder this time, ensuring nearby rows could hear, "we'll need you to move to the rear cabin temporarily. We're adjusting weight distribution." The words hung in the air like smoke. Several passengers glanced up instantly, brows furrowed, confused. Lena looked up slowly, her tone quiet but clear. "Weight distribution," she repeated softly. "For only one passenger?" Megan hesitated for just a fraction of a second. But in that hesitation, the narrative cracked. A man in a gray Armani suit sitting across the aisle. Charles Holt smirked openly, leaning forward so his voice would carry. "First class isn't what it used to be," he muttered, just loud enough to draw soft chuckles from two nearby travelers. Lena turned her gaze to him, unhurried and sharp, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "Tell me," she said calmly, "what makes you more deserving of this seat than I am?" Holt blinked rapidly, caught off guard, his smirk faltering as a few passengers turned to watch him instead. Megan, sensing the shift, stepped between them, her smile fixed but tight. "This isn't about deserving," she said firmly. "It's about procedures." Lena tilted her head slightly, her expression neutral, her voice steady. "Procedures that somehow apply only to me." Silence settled for a moment, the kind of silence that stretches like glass before it shatters. Holt shifted uncomfortably, pulling out his phone, while a young woman 2 rows back whispered to her companion. "She's right. Though, why just her?" The tension in the cabin thickened, a quiet current threading through soft lighting and polished leather. Megan adjusted her posture, doubling down rather than retreating. "I'm simply following orders." "Miss Washington," she said, lowering her voice this time, hoping to reclaim control. Lena leaned back into her seat, folding her hands in her lap, her expression serene. "Then I'd like those orders in writing," she replied softly. Megan froze for just a moment, unprepared for the quiet authority in Lena's tone, before forcing a polite smile and retreating toward the galley, whispering something into her intercom headset as she disappeared behind the curtain. But Lena had already seen the flicker of panic on Megan's face, the slight tightening of her shoulders, the shift in her breathing. That was all she needed to know. Sliding her phone onto her lap, Lena opened Pinnacle Ventures' secure internal app with a fingerprint scan, her movements hidden beneath the tray table. A single typed command sent ripples through a private network of analysts already monitoring her flight in real time. Level 5 ethics audit, Stage 4 activated, flagging Megan Reed, lead attendant, somewhere in Manhattan. A red notification flashed across an executive dashboard at Pinnacle's headquarters, triggering protocols that would pull Horizon Airways' top brass into emergency review within the hour. Meanwhile, Lena sat quietly in her seat, closing the app as if nothing had happened. Around her, passengers whispered in low voices, some leaning closer, others scrolling through their phones to find out what was unfolding on social media. Clips from the Skyhaven Lounge were already going viral, short videos showing officers flanking Lena, Victoria's terse commands, and passengers murmuring in disbelief. A trending caption flashed across several feeds. "First-class passenger removed for looking out of place?" Hashtags formed like wildfire, gaining traction by the second. Charles Holt noticed it, too, his phone lighting up as he watched the clips play out on Twitter. His smirk faded. He glanced uneasily at Lena, perhaps realizing, for the first time, that this woman might not be who he assumed she was. Megan returned a few minutes later, her tone cooler now, the pretense of warmth entirely gone. "Miss Washington," she said, leaning slightly toward her seat, "please remember that this is a private airline cabin. We expect passengers to comply without making a scene." Lena didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her voice was soft but carried the weight of quiet command. "I haven't raised my voice," she said calmly. "I haven't broken any rules. And yet here you are, making a scene for me." Megan opened her mouth, but no words came out. Passengers nearby exchanged glances, a few shaking their heads slowly, others murmuring, "This isn't right." Lena's phone buzzed gently again in her lap. A new notification from Pinnacle appeared on the discreet lock screen. "FAA compliance monitoring activated. Executive oversight engaged." She placed the device face down, resting her hands lightly on the armrests as the plane's engines roared softly beneath her feet, the cabin vibrating with restrained anticipation. She knew the next move didn't belong to Megan anymore. The next move belonged to her. The plane touched down at JFK with a soft jolt, the landing gear screeching against the runway. But for Lena Washington, the real turbulence was just beginning. As the first-class cabin emptied into the sleek corridors of Terminal 7, she walked with measured steps, her leather briefcase swinging lightly by her side, her expression composed despite the storm gathering beneath the surface. An attendant in a crisp uniform intercepted her near the gate, speaking quickly and quietly. "Miss Washington, security needs you to come with us." There was no question in the tone. It was an order dressed as politeness, without hesitation. Lena followed, her stride steady, unbroken. Phones rose behind her, capturing every second, every angle, as whispers rippled through the arriving passengers. "That's her, the woman from Skyhaven, the one they stopped." Cameras clicked like insects in the background, documenting a narrative none of them understood. Not yet. Moments later, she was escorted into a glass-walled conference room deep inside JFK's executive wing. The space was modern and minimalist, sleek white walls, a long polished oak table, leather chairs perfectly aligned beneath soft recessed lights. But the calm design couldn't disguise the unease hanging in the air. Seated at the head of the table was David Langston, Horizon Airways COO, his silver hair combed back meticulously, his jaw tense as his fingers tapped a staccato rhythm against the armrest. Across from him sat Laura Bennett, the FAA's compliance representative, her neat stack of files untouched, her expression unreadable. Megan Reed was already there, her polished uniform immaculate, though her posture betrayed nerves she couldn't mask. A monitor on the wall displayed Victoria Reed's face, patched in via secure video from Skyhaven. The moment Lena stepped into the room, conversations died. Langston cleared his throat, adjusting his cufflinks, speaking with a practiced corporate smoothness that barely concealed his discomfort. "Dr. Washington." He began carefully, his tone polite but tight. "We've been informed there were incidents at Skyhaven and onboard Flight 542. Our priority here is to resolve this quietly and professionally." Lena set her briefcase on the table, her movements deliberate, precise. She didn't sit immediately. Instead, she looked at each person in the room, letting the silence stretch just long enough to shift the weight of authority before she spoke. "Incidents," she repeated softly, as though tasting the word. Then she slowly lowered herself into the chair at the center of the table, folding her hands lightly on the leather surface. Her gaze locked on Langston's, calm but unyielding. "I'd like you to explain," she said, "why your staff escalated a verified passenger's boarding into a public spectacle." Megan shifted uncomfortably, her manicured fingers twisting subtly against her lap. Victoria's image on the monitor flickered slightly, her posture stiff, arms crossed tightly. Langston cleared his throat again, his voice thinner this time. "Dr. Washington, our security protocols are designed to—" "Your protocols," Lena interrupted softly, "do not include profiling passengers based on appearance." Her voice was quiet, but the weight behind it silenced him instantly. The younger compliance officer sitting in the corner shifted awkwardly, scribbling hurried notes. Laura Bennett finally leaned forward, adjusting her glasses, her tone neutral but sharp. "I've reviewed partial footage from Skyhaven," she said. "I've also seen recordings from passengers inside the first-class cabin. Dr. Washington is correct. Multiple actions taken today appear inconsistent with Horizon's official policy." Megan's head jerked slightly toward Laura, her mouth parting in disbelief, but before she could respond, Lena unlatched her briefcase and withdrew a thin black folder stamped with the Silver Pinnacle Ventures crest. She placed it gently on the table and slid it forward, her fingertips releasing it like an executioner letting go of a blade. "This," she said calmly, "is my Level 5 ethics audit report on Horizon Airways." A faint ripple of confusion moved through the room, visible even in Victoria's frozen expression on the monitor. Langston hesitated before asking, "Your Audit? Lena leaned back slightly, her voice steady but carrying a quiet power that seemed to fill the room without effort. I am Dr. Lena Washington, she said, her tone deliberate, each syllable crystal clear. Chief Executive Officer of Pinnacle Ventures, the company currently underwriting Horizon's $5.5 billion lifeline. The silence that followed landed like a thunderclap. Langston's pen slipped from his hand, clattering against the table. Megan's polished facade cracked completely, her lips parting wordlessly as her face drained of color. Victoria's image on the monitor froze mid-blink, but the widening of her eyes before the feed caught was unmistakable. Lena pressed a small button on her tablet, and the monitor behind her lit up, displaying crystal-clear footage from her lapel camera, Victoria's radioed commands at Skyhaven, Megan's public humiliation tactics on board, Charles Holt's sneering remarks. Gasps filled the room as the clips played back in sequence, every recorded moment presented without commentary. Because it didn't need any. Your culture, Lena said softly when the footage ended, her voice steady, is documented. Your decisions, your words, your biases, all of it. She paused, her gaze moving deliberately from Langston to Megan to Victoria. Pinnacle Ventures' investment in Horizon Airways is contingent on one thing: operational and cultural integrity. Today, that integrity failed. Langston leaned forward suddenly, his voice cracking slightly as he tried to recover. Dr. Washington, please, we can correct this. Whatever happened, we can review policies, retrain staff, make this right. Lena raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence without saying a word. It wasn't anger, it was control. Complete. Quiet control. David, she said evenly, this isn't about policies, it's about values. She turned her attention to Laura Bennett, whose pen had stopped moving as she waited for the next words carefully. Effective immediately. Lena continued. Pinnacle Ventures is freezing its $5.5 billion investment pending a comprehensive review of Horizon's ethics, training, and leadership. The weight of those words crashed into the room like a tidal wave. Megan inhaled sharply, gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles blanched. Victoria's feed flickered again, this time revealing the panic she was trying to mask. Langston's shoulders sagged visibly, the reality of looming financial devastation washing over him like a cold flood. Laura Bennett adjusted her glasses, scribbling furiously on her notes, the FAA's involvement shifting instantly from observation to oversight. Lena clasped her hands lightly together, her voice soft but absolute. You have two options, she said calmly, her gaze steady on Langston. You can confront this, dismantle the culture you've built, and lead real reform. Or you can watch Horizon collapse under the weight of its own negligence. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Langston nodded slowly, his voice barely audible. Understood. Megan opened her mouth as though to speak, but Lena's gaze stopped her cold, slicing away whatever protest she might have offered. Finally, Lena stood, gathering her briefcase, her movements unhurried, every motion deliberate. As she walked toward the door, she paused, her voice softer now, almost compassionate but still unyielding. This isn't just about me, she said quietly. This is about every passenger you made feel invisible. Every person judged by appearance instead of merit. Fix it. Not because Pinnacle demands it, but because dignity demands it, without waiting for a response. Lena stepped out into the hallway, her heels clicking softly against polished marble, her expression composed as the door closed behind her. Outside the glass walls, airport staff and passengers stared, hushed whispers following her like shadows. They didn't know all the details yet, but they understood one thing. Something enormous had shifted, and the woman at the center of it was no longer a mystery. News traveled faster than any aircraft could. By the time Dr. Lena Washington left JFK's executive wing and stepped into the terminal, the story had already exploded across social media, financial news networks, and investor forums. Within minutes, Hashtag Fly with Dignity trended worldwide, with clips from Skyhaven's lounge and Horizon Flight 542 flooding TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. Millions watched Megan Reid's staged humiliation, Victoria's radio commands, and Lena's quiet composure as she stood her ground. But it wasn't just the public watching. Wall Street was watching, too. Horizon Airways stock opened the next morning at $74.23 per share within hours. It nosedived below $42, shedding nearly $7 billion in market value before trading was halted. Institutional investors, blindsided by Pinnacle Ventures' sudden freeze on the $5.5 billion bailout, flooded Horizon's boardroom with demands for answers. Phone lines burned hot as executives scrambled, but their carefully rehearsed statements of misunderstandings and isolated incidents crumbled instantly under the weight of the lapel camera footage Lena had released to the FAA. Every second of bias, every smirk, every microaggression, now dissected frame by frame on national television. CNBC ran the headline in bold across their ticker: Pinnacle freezes $5.5 funding. Horizon Airways faces survival crisis. By noon, major travel blogs and news outlets joined in, amplifying passenger testimonies, inflaming public outrage. Hashtags surged like wildfire. Hashtag boycott. Horizon climbed into the top 3 worldwide trends, with thousands canceling first-class bookings, screenshotting confirmation emails as proof of protest. In less than 24 hours, Horizon logged 2,300 canceled reservations and projected an $82 million revenue loss for the quarter. Meanwhile, Lena sat in Pinnacle Ventures' glass-walled New York headquarters, 35 floors above the city, overlooking Manhattan's skyline as the storm below intensified. Her executive team surrounded a massive oval table in the boardroom, their screens lighting up with real-time dashboards tracking media sentiment, investor alerts, and regulatory movements. We're getting calls from the SEC, the FAA, and 3 senators' offices, her chief legal counsel reported, sliding a printed summary across the polished walnut table. They want to know if Pinnacle intends to follow through with full divestment. Lena's calm presence anchored the room despite the chaos. "We're not divesting," she said simply, her voice firm, steady. "Not yet." Her chief financial officer, Michael Lee, leaned forward. "If Horizon can't recover investor confidence, we're essentially holding a sinking ship. Freezing the funds has already triggered panic. The stock won't survive another week." Lena didn't flinch, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of her coffee mug. "Good," she said quietly. "Panic is the only thing that will make them listen." Silence spread through the room as the meaning settled. She wasn't out to destroy Horizon. She was forcing it to confront itself. Meanwhile, Horizon's boardroom in Dallas painted a very different picture. Chaos layered over desperation. David Langston, the COO, sat slumped at the head of the table, his tie loosened, papers scattered around him like fallen leaves. Megan Reid sat 2 seats away, pale and rigid, scrolling through hundreds of furious messages flooding her inbox, some from passengers, others from internal employees she'd humiliated over the years. Victoria Reid's suspension notice had already gone public. Her 2-decade reign as security director toppled overnight. The rest of Horizon's executive team spoke over one another, their voices tangled in confusion, anger, and fear. "We can't afford to lose Pinnacle's funding," shouted one board member, slamming his palm against the polished oak table. "Without it, we're weeks away from liquidity collapse," another chimed in bitterly. "We shouldn't have treated this like an isolated PR problem. Now it's systemic. FAA, DOT, and Pinnacle breathing down our necks." Langston rubbed his temples, his voice hoarse when he finally spoke. "This isn't just PR anymore," he said quietly. "This is survival." But survival wasn't guaranteed. Behind closed doors, FAA compliance officers were already drafting mandatory oversight measures, citing Lena's footage as evidence of systemic discrimination in passenger treatment. Meanwhile, Consumer rights groups announced class action lawsuits on behalf of affected passengers, citing decades of silent bias now thrust into daylight. Megan stared blankly at the table as another alert buzzed on her phone. Petition for her termination surpasses 1.2 million signatures. She swallowed hard, the full weight of consequences settling where entitlement once lived. Back at Pinnacle, Lena studied reports flashing across her tablet, real-time analytics mapping every ripple of Horizon's implosion. She wasn't celebrating their fall. This was about leverage, not vengeance, but leverage had its price, and she was calculating it carefully. Laura Bennett from the FAA just called, said her chief operations officer, Elena Ruiz. They've accelerated their inquiry timeline. They want Horizon to implement full diversity and inclusion reforms under FAA-monitored conditions or risk losing their federal operating license entirely. Lena nodded slightly, already expecting the move. Draft Pinnacle's official recommendation, she said softly, her voice calm amid the storm. We'll conditionally reinstate investment only if Horizon agrees to 3 things. Mandatory anti-bias training for all 19,000 employees, independent cultural audits every quarter, and full restructuring of their executive leadership. Around the table, the executives exchanged glances. It was bold, unprecedented, risky, and entirely Lena's style. Later that evening, Lena appeared on CNN for an exclusive interview, her navy blazer sharp under studio lights, her expression steady as the anchor leaned in. Dr. Washington, he asked, critics are calling your decision to freeze Horizon's funding reckless, suggesting you've endangered thousands of jobs. How do you respond? Lena turned slightly toward the camera, her voice calm but carrying weight. I'm not here to destroy Horizon Airways, she said softly. I'm here to save it, but not at the cost of dignity. You cannot build sustainable profit on systemic prejudice. You cannot ignore integrity until the numbers collapse. This isn't about punishing one airline. It's about reforming an industry. Overnight, her words became headlines. CEO turns crisis into call for change trended on business forums, while grassroots groups praised Lena for confronting corporate inequity on a national stage. But on the trading floor, Horizon's survival remained uncertain. Analysts projected Chapter 11 filings if Pinnacle withheld funding beyond 60 days. Private investors backed out of expansion plans, and 2 rival airlines began circling Horizon's prime routes like vultures sensing blood. Still, Lena held the line. Behind the scenes, she instructed Pinnacle's communications team to launch a strategic initiative, the Equity in Flight program, promising scholarships, workforce retraining, and accountability measures tied to every future aviation investment Pinnacle touched. The move wasn't just damage control, it was a blueprint for systemic reform that other investors quickly adopted, forcing the entire airline industry to re-examine long-ignored inequities. As the week closed, Horizon Airways faced an ultimatum from Pinnacle Ventures, the FAA, and its own collapsing investor base by Friday evening. A late-breaking announcement shook the industry. Horizon's board had voted 8-1 to accept Pinnacle's reform demands in full. Executives implicated in discriminatory practices, including Megan Reed and 2 regional VPs, were terminated effective immediately. A company-wide email promised sweeping cultural changes, citing Lena Washington's audit findings by name. That night, Lena stood in her Manhattan office, the city glowing beneath her floor-to-ceiling windows. Her reflection stared back from the glass, composed but contemplative, her mind turning over the magnitude of what had begun. She wasn't just reshaping Horizon Airways anymore. She was forcing an entire industry to choose between the comfort of old habits and the courage to evolve. As another secure notification buzzed softly on her phone, Lena exhaled deeply, steady and certain. Stage 6 of her audit was complete. Stage 7, transformation, had just begun, 3 months later. Skyhaven International Airport looked different. The marble floors still gleamed, the crystal chandeliers still glittered, and the scent of fresh coffee still drifted through the first-class lounge. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Horizon Airways had survived its darkest hour, not through silence or denial, but through transformation. The company Lena Washington once threatened to collapse was now reshaped under her uncompromising reforms. Its new leadership held accountable, its values rebuilt from the ground up. Yet for Lena, this wasn't victory, it was responsibility. On this warm spring morning, she walked through the towering glass entrance of Skyhaven, her leather briefcase resting lightly against her palm, her steps measured and steady. Her navy blazer fit neatly over a cream silk blouse, the same worn, scuffed loafers on her feet, not as a statement, but as a reminder. Eyes followed her instantly, but this time there was no whispering, no questioning looks, no subtle glances filled with judgment. There was recognition now, respect. Some even lifted their phones, but not to record scandal. They recorded reverence. A young airport employee near the check-in counter nudged his coworker, whispering, "That's her, Dr. Washington." Word traveled quickly. As Lena approached the exclusive first-class lounge, she noticed the Horizon Airways staff standing taller, their navy uniforms crisp, their nameplates polished, their expressions different, not colder, but kinder. Posters along the corridor bore the airline's new initiative, Equity in Flight, its bold silver lettering glowing under soft, recessed lights. Below the slogan were Lena's own words, now etched permanently into Horizon's mission: "Dignity is not a privilege, it is a right." At the lounge entrance, the concierge stepped forward quickly, offering a warm smile. "Welcome back, Dr. Washington," she said softly, her voice tinged with gratitude rather than protocol. Lena returned the smile politely, her gaze steady but gentle. "Thank you," she replied simply. Scanning the room she had once been dragged from under suspicion, the space felt familiar but lighter now, stripped of its unspoken hierarchies. She walked toward the center, every step slow, deliberate, and there, behind the reception desk, stood Victoria Reed, no longer in her commanding black suit, no longer issuing orders through radios. Today, she wore a simple gray uniform, the Horizon logo embroidered subtly over her chest, her posture smaller, her authority gone, when she saw Lena. Victoria froze for a moment, her hands stiff on the countertop. Then, slowly, she stepped forward, lowering her voice so only Lena could hear. "Dr. Washington," she began, her tone softer than Lena had ever heard. I wanted to apologize for what I said, for what I assumed." Her eyes dropped to the floor briefly, the weight of her own choices visible in the tremor of her hands. Lena studied her quietly, the memory of that day vivid yet distant now, the humiliation, the whispers, the command to escort her out, and yet. Lena's voice was calm when she finally spoke. "Apologies matter," she said softly, "but change matters more." Victoria nodded once, her shoulders sagging, the tension she carried dissolving like mist. She turned away slowly, returning to her modest duties behind the desk, no longer the unchallenged authority she once was. From across the room, Megan Reed approached hesitantly, dressed in a far simpler uniform than before, stripped of the gold nameplate and first-class privileges she'd wielded like weapons. Her steps were slower now, her confidence muted. But there was something different in her face, not defiance, but humility. "Dr. Washington," she said quietly, pausing just a few feet away, her voice steadier than she expected. "I completed the training, all of it." Lena turned toward her fully, her gaze steady but not unkind. Megan swallowed hard and continued. "I didn't understand how deep it went, how much harm we caused without ever seeing it. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know I'm trying to be better." There was a silence between them, brief but meaningful. Lena inclined her head slightly, her tone measured. Then make sure the next person in seat 2A never has to fight for their place. Megan nodded quickly, her throat tightening, her voice catching slightly as she whispered, "I will." She stepped back, returning to her duties quietly. Her entire posture changed. Around the lounge, staff moved with a different rhythm now, no longer scanning clothes before tickets, no longer profiling faces before access. The cultural shift Lena had fought for wasn't just on paper. It was visible here, living, breathing, real. But the transformation didn't stop at Skyhaven. Across the country, Pinnacle Ventures' equity and flight program had reshaped the airline industry itself. 12 major carriers adopted similar anti-bias initiatives. FAA regulations evolved, requiring quarterly cultural audits for airlines receiving federal subsidies. Scholarships funded by Pinnacle now trained hundreds of underrepresented candidates to become pilots, engineers, and aviation leaders. Lena's single confrontation at Skyhaven had rippled outward, shifting more than policy. It shifted possibility. Yet, as she stood near the center of the lounge, she didn't bask in credit or applause. Her gaze drifted toward a nearby family, a young black couple holding hands as their 2 children sipped juice boxes beside their small carry-on bags. The parents smiled softly, chatting with a concierge who addressed them with genuine warmth and ease. No tension, no suspicion, just dignity. That was the victory Lena had come for, as she prepared to board her flight. David Langston approached, the new CEO of Horizon Airways since the board's restructuring. His gray suit was sharp, but his tone was humble. "Dr. Washington," he said, offering his hand, "I want you to know, Horizon is different now because of you. We've still got a long way to go. But we're trying to earn back the trust we lost." Lena shook his hand firmly, her expression steady but softened by sincerity. "Trust," she said simply, "isn't something you earn back with promises. You earn it with actions." Langston nodded solemnly, knowing her words would echo long after this conversation. As boarding was called, Lena stepped toward the gate, her leather briefcase swinging gently at her side. Cameras flashed softly from a respectful distance, passengers murmuring as she passed, their voices hushed not from scandal but reverence, before stepping onto the jet bridge. Lena paused and turned slightly, her voice quiet but carrying across the lounge. "For everyone watching," she said softly, "remember this. Never let anyone decide where you belong." The silence that followed was heavy yet full of understanding, full of respect, full of quiet awe. And as Lena disappeared down the jet bridge, the staff, the passengers, and even the once skeptical executives left behind understood that this was more than one woman's victory. It was a cultural reckoning, a reminder that dignity isn't negotiable, a promise that change, once demanded, cannot be undone. That day, Horizon Airways didn't just survive, it transformed. And Lena Washington walked forward, not as the woman they once doubted, but as the catalyst who reminded an entire industry that humanity always comes before hierarchy. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. See you in the next story.